Let me guess. You think there's a gene for your eye color, a gene for your height, maybe even a gene for your personality. That's exactly what science and the media want you to believe. But what if I told you there are no genes for anything? You've been lied to. Your teacher lied. The Human Genome Project lied. Even Mendel, the so-called father of genetics, lied. And if you still believe in the blueprint of life, you're living in a fantasy. Here's what they don't want you to know. Why can two blue-eyed parents actually have a brown-eyed child? Why did the Human Genome Project promise DNA cards for everyone by 2020 and then deliver nothing? And why clinging to simple Mendelian genetics isn't just wrong? It can lead us straight back to eugenics. The truth is far stranger, far more beautiful, and far more terrifying than anything you learned in school. Today, we're tearing down a century of lies and revealing what your DNA really does and what it doesn't do. Rewind to the year 2000. The world is buzzing with excitement about the new millennium, but something even bigger is happening in the world of science. The Human Genome Project, the most ambitious scientific endeavor in human history, has just announced they've cracked the code of human life. Scientists promised us the moon. By 2020, they said, we'd all carry genome cards in our wallets. These magical cards would tell us everything about ourselves, what diseases we'd get, how long we'd live, even what careers we'd be good at. Doctors would wave these cards like magic wands, instantly knowing how to cure us. Cancer would be a thing of the past. Genetic diseases would vanish. We were entering a golden age of personalized medicine. 25 years and over $3 billion later, where are those cards? 2020 came and went. No genome cards, no miracle cures. In fact, we discovered something that shattered the very foundation of genetic science. The human genome isn't a blueprint at all. Think about it. If your DNA was really an instruction manual, why can't we read it like one? Why can't scientists look at your genetic code and tell you exactly what you'll look like, how tall you'll be, or what diseases you'll develop? The uncomfortable truth is that the Human Genome Project didn't solve the mystery of human life. It revealed just how little we actually understand about ourselves. But here's the real kicker. The scientists knew this would happen. Deep down, they suspected that the simple genes equal traits model was wrong. But they had invested too much money, too much reputation, and too much hope to admit the truth. Remember sitting in biology class, staring at those neat little squares? Your teacher called them Punnett squares, and they made genetics look so simple. Take two parents, mix their genes like ingredients in a recipe, and voila, you can predict exactly what their children will look like. Brown eyes are dominant, your teacher said with confidence. Blue eyes are recessive. If both parents have blue eyes, all their children will have blue eyes. It's basic science. You believed it because it made sense. Genes were like light switches, either on or off. Find the gene for brown eyes, flip the switch, and you get brown eyes. Find the gene for height, and you know how tall someone will be. Simple, clean, and completely wrong. Even the textbook example, eye color, doesn't follow these rules. Blue-eyed parents regularly have brown-eyed children. Green-eyed children are born to two brown-eyed parents. Some people's eyes change color as they age. Others have two different colored eyes from birth. How do you fit that into a Punnett square? But here's the truly disturbing part. Your teachers knew this didn't work. Scientists have known for decades that Mendel's simple model breaks down with almost every real-world example. Yet they kept teaching it because the truth was too complicated, too messy, too uncomfortable to explain to students. You weren't just taught wrong, you were deliberately miseducated. The question is, why? But before we unravel this conspiracy of ignorance, know this. What you're about to discover will change how you see yourself, your family, and every human being on this planet. The rabbit hole goes deeper than you can imagine, and once you see the truth, there's no going back. If you're ready to have your mind blown by what science has been hiding from you, then stick with me, because we're just getting started. Let's talk about what actually happens when we look at real human traits instead of textbook fantasies. Take identical twins, two people with exactly the same DNA. According to everything you learned in school, they should be carbon copies of each other, right? Same genes, same traits, same everything. But that's not what we see. Identical twins can have different handedness, one left-handed, one right-handed. They can develop different diseases at different times. Some identical twins are born with different biological sexes, despite having identical chromosomes. How is this possible if genes are blueprints? Even stranger, parents who both have blue eyes, who should, according to every biology textbook, only be able to have blue-eyed children, sometimes produce brown-eyed babies. When this happens, doctors often assume the mother had an affair. Families are torn apart. Relationships are destroyed. All because we cling to a genetic model that simply doesn't work. But the most mind-bending example is eye color variation itself. Human eyes don't come in just brown or blue. There's green, hazel, amber, gray, and violet. Some people have rings of different colors in their eyes. Others have eyes that appear to change color in different light. Some are born with one blue eye and one brown eye. How do you explain this rainbow of possibilities with Mendel's simple dominant recessive model? You can't. The model breaks down completely when confronted with the beautiful complexity of real human beings. And if we can't even predict eye color, supposedly the simplest genetic trait, how can we possibly predict complex things like personality, intelligence, or behavior? In the 1940s, a brilliant British scientist named Conrad Waddington realized that genetics needed a completely new metaphor. Instead of blueprints and instruction manuals, he proposed something far more elegant and truthful: the genetic landscape. Imagine a circus tent held up by ropes and poles. The ropes and poles don't determine exactly where every part of the tent will be, but they create a landscape of hills and valleys. Now imagine rolling marbles down this landscape. Each marble will end up in one of the valleys, but you can't predict exactly which valley any specific marble will choose. This is how genetics really works. Your genes aren't instructions. They're the ropes and poles that create a landscape of possibilities. Your traits are the marbles, influenced by genes, environment, random chance, and countless other factors we don't even understand yet. Take height, for example. You might carry genes that push you toward being tall, but whether you actually reach that height depends on nutrition during childhood, illness, stress, and hundreds of other factors. Your genes don't determine your height. They influence the landscape of possibilities. This metaphor explains everything that Mendel's model couldn't. Why identical twins can be different. Why two blue-eyed parents can have a brown-eyed child. Why your height, personality, and health can't be read like a barcode from your DNA. But if this model is so much better at explaining reality, why weren't you taught this in school? Why do we still cling to the broken blueprint metaphor? Every day, newspaper headlines scream about genetic discoveries. Scientists find gene for obesity. Researchers discover gene for intelligence. New study links gene to homosexuality. These headlines sell newspapers and get clicks. But they're based on the same flawed thinking that gave us those useless Punnett squares. The uncomfortable truth is that there are no genes for anything complex. Let's start with something that seems obvious. Biological sex. XY chromosomes equal male. XX chromosomes equal female. Simple, right? Every biology textbook teaches this as fact. But then we meet athletes like Caster Semenya, who has XY chromosomes but developed as female, or people with XY chromosomes who are completely insensitive to testosterone and develop feminine bodies, or individuals with XX chromosomes who develop masculine characteristics due to hormonal variations. Even biological sex, something we think of as the most basic binary trait, exists on a spectrum influenced by dozens of genes, hormones, environmental factors, and random developmental events. If there's no simple gene for maleness or gene for femaleness, what about diseases? Surely single gene disorders like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's disease prove that some genes directly cause traits. Even here, the story is more complex. Two people with the exact same disease gene can have completely different experiences. One might develop severe symptoms early in life, while another remains healthy for decades. Why? Because hundreds of other genes, environmental factors, and random events influence whether and how a disease manifests. The gene for X thinking isn't just scientifically wrong, it's dangerous. When we believe that complex human traits are controlled by simple genetic switches, we start making terrible moral judgments about people based on their DNA. Here's where the genetics lie becomes truly sinister. Once you believe that genes directly control traits, it's a short leap to ranking those traits as good or bad. And once you start ranking genetic traits, you're walking down the same dark path that led to eugenics. Modern headlines make this slide seem almost inevitable. Gene for wealth discovered. Scientists link DNA to social media addiction. Genetic basis of criminal behavior identified. Each headline implies that complex human behaviors, shaped by culture, economics, education, and countless other factors, can be reduced to simple genetic codes. But think about what these headlines really mean. If wealth is genetic, then poverty must be a genetic flaw. If criminal behavior is in your DNA, then justice becomes a matter of genetic testing. If intelligence is determined by genes, then some races or groups must be genetically superior to others. This isn't hypothetical. We've seen this movie before. In the early 1900s, scientists used flawed genetic reasoning to justify forced sterilizations, immigration restrictions, and ultimately the systematic extermination of entire populations. They claimed that poverty, criminality, and mental illness were genetic diseases that needed to be eliminated from the human gene pool. The tools have changed, but the thinking is eerily similar. When we see headlines about genes for complex traits, we're seeing the same reductive logic that powered history's darkest chapters. The difference is that now we know better, or we should. But why do these dangerous oversimplifications keep appearing? Why haven't we learned from the failures of the Human Genome Project and the breakdown of simple genetic models? Here's a secret that would make your high school biology teacher very uncomfortable. Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics, might have been a fraud. In 1900, a sharp-eyed scientist named Raphael Weldon took a closer look at Mendel's famous pea experiments. What he found was shocking. Mendel's peas didn't naturally come in the neat categories he described. In the wild, pea color existed on a spectrum, light yellow to dark yellow to light green to dark green. There were no clear dominant or recessive categories. So how did Mendel get his neat results? He artificially purified his pea plants through selective breeding until he created artificial categories that don't exist in nature. He took the messy, complex reality of genetics and simplified it into discrete, teachable units. Weldon famously declared that Mendel must be a genius or a liar. The evidence suggests both might be true. Mendel was genius enough to recognize that genetics needed simple categories to be understood and taught, but he may have lied about how natural and universal those categories actually were. Think about what this means. The entire foundation of genetics education is based on artificial laboratory conditions that don't exist in the real world. It's like teaching physics by only showing students frictionless surfaces and perfect spheres, then acting surprised when real-world physics is messier and more complex. Mendel's laws only work when you create artificial, controlled conditions that strip away the complexity of real life. The moment you step outside the laboratory, the neat categories collapse, and the beautiful messiness of actual genetics takes over. But admitting this would mean acknowledging that we've been teaching genetics wrong for over a century. It would mean admitting that textbooks, teachers, and scientists have been perpetuating a useful fiction rather than scientific truth. The good news is that some educators are finally telling the truth. The Genetics Pedagogies Project, led by researchers who are tired of perpetuating genetic myths, has developed new ways to teach genetics that actually reflect how genes work. Instead of starting with Punnett squares and dominant recessive traits, these educators teach students about genetic landscapes, probability, and complexity from day one. They show students real examples of genetic variation instead of artificial laboratory categories. The results are remarkable. Students taught this way are much less likely to believe in genetic determinism. They don't fall for headlines about genes for complex traits. They understand that human beings are the product of intricate interactions between genes, environment, and chance. Most importantly, they don't make the moral mistake of judging people based on their genetic makeup. They understand that genetics is about probability and possibility, not destiny and determinism. But this means that if you were taught the old way, with Mendel's peas and Punnett squares, you've been miseducated. Your understanding of genetics is not just incomplete, it's actively wrong and potentially dangerous. The question is, are you willing to let go of the comfortable lies and embrace the beautiful, complex truth? So let's circle back to where we started. No, there are no genes for anything. There are only complex systems, probabilities, and interactions that unfold in ways too intricate for simple predictions. Your eye color isn't controlled by a single gene. It's the result of multiple genes, environmental factors during development, and random events that occurred while you were still in the womb. Your height isn't predetermined by your parents' heights. It's influenced by genetic tendencies, nutrition, health, stress, and countless other factors. Your personality, intelligence, behavior, and even your susceptibility to diseases all emerge from this same complex dance between genes and everything else. You are not the product of a genetic blueprint. You are the result of an ongoing conversation between your DNA and the world around you. This isn't just a scientific revelation, it's a moral imperative. If we don't let go of the blueprint fantasy, we risk sliding back into dangerous pseudoscience and eugenics. When we reduce human beings to their genetic codes, we stop seeing them as complex individuals shaped by experience, choice, and circumstance. The stakes couldn't be higher. In a world where genetic testing is becoming cheaper and more common, the temptation to make genetic judgments about people is growing. If we don't understand what genes actually do, and what they don't do, we risk creating a new form of scientific racism, dressed up in the language of modern genetics. And if this is how wrong we were about something as simple as eye color, just imagine how wrong we are about intelligence, sexuality, creativity, morality, or even free will itself. The genetics revolution isn't coming. It's already here. The only question is whether we'll use this knowledge to see the beautiful complexity of human beings, or whether we'll repeat the terrible mistakes of the past by trying to reduce people to their DNA. The choice is ours. But first, we have to admit that everything we thought we knew about genetics was wrong.